Ron, are we ready to go? See, we have the live on YouTube. We're good? Okay. Thank you, everybody, for coming back together so quickly. I did get a note from Aaron. I just got a note that he's going to be running late, so he may um, join us here shortly when he's done. Hopefully, everybody has received, and I've just sent a revision to the standards maybe 25 minutes ago with today's date and a draft B. And I'd like to work off of that document today. And if it's okay with everybody, I want to just talk a little bit about how we got from what we looked at Tuesday to the draft that you're looking at today, how they changed really, um, and and then kind of go quickly into what I think are probably the hot topics for discussion that we'll focus on those. The other ones are fairly minor, I feel like. All of this with the understanding that City Council has set um, a time of tomorrow at 2 to consider recommendations out of this meeting for implementation, I would assume tomorrow or shortly thereafter. So I think we're kind of under some pressure to get something out of this session. So if it's okay with everybody, I'd like to just kind of go over in general terms the shift in form from what you saw Tuesday to today. There's a cover letter, which I just wanted to introduce the issue, give a quick kind of executive summary of what happened and what you all came up with. I do think that the issues of somehow limiting, this phased approach to allowing renters to come over is going to be at the forefront of everybody's minds when they receive these. So I wanted to be right up front about that issue. That the recommendations that you all are coming up with do not include provisions that would have occupancy further reduced from what it already is reduced to, and give your justification for making that recommendation. That basically there are already controls in place that you all believe will maintain occupancy levels at a safe level for the foreseeable future. So that cover letter will go along with the draft of standards. The draft is very similar to what you looked at. I will tell you that I took out items that talked about, there was a lot in that initial draft about team members and what you should do with team members. I felt like that was really geared towards hotels and probably um, not as impactful on the Isle of Palms, and not really um, not necessary out here. I think that you will really, the focus for us will be short-term rentals. There are obviously hotels, but they will. I think we didn't need to dedicate a lot of our time and recommendations on that. So I took those items out. The things that I added in are on page 3, and they're really bullets 4, 5, 6, and 7. Um, and those were really focused on notification. If we have a case pop up, what the proper notification protocol will be, room recovery or unit recovery protocol, and we basically uh, deferred to the CDC guidelines. If you do have a case um, come up, what you would do, and the what I think we're going to probably talk about here shortly, and probably the biggest impact are the last two, which are enforcement, which I'll talk about a little bit, and then one that we haven't really touched on too much or come to a consensus on is the duration of this of these measures. If we want to put a date on it, or if we want to pick another trigger that would dictate when these standards were to kind of sunset and go away. So we'll talk about that a little bit. Enforcement, I think, is probably the biggest change, and I just wanted to talk a little bit about that. When we talked Tuesday, and I think Sandy brought up the question as to how, would these be rules? Would they be guidelines? And quite frankly, I initially wrote everything as a guideline with a should in front of it. And then in rereading that and in thinking really about, the greater community and their expectations of what should come from this task force, it quite frankly came across as flimsy and really not much of a standard or not much of a recommendation without some teeth to these recommendations. So the way it's currently organized is a lot of what you see in those standards are set up as requirements. They have the word shall, so there is a requirement there. I will say though that there is included in the document a provision about undue hardship. So if something is keeping somebody or some owner or some manager from being able to do something, that's an immediate, kind of way out of that provision if there's an undue hardship there, and that's defined. Secondly, the standards clearly indicate that if a guest were to do something, that you as managers or as owners would not be held accountable for what a guest may or may not do. Thirdly, these standards have all of the executive orders and the emergency orders have been being handled by the police department. And I think, in my personal opinion, they've used great discretion in administering those. And really, they've only issued. It's been very few tickets, but it's only in cases where somebody is just refusing to comply for whatever reason. They're just not wanting to comply. So it's really being used as a last resort. And finally, it would be a disorderly conduct charge. It wouldn't be revocation of a license or, what I would call a major offense, but it would be what I would call a slap on the wrist for not adhering to these standards. So that, in a nutshell, is it. I really appreciate the comments that I did get. And I guess, like I said, I would expect that enforcement may be the issue that people want to talk about the most. I could be wrong, but for the sake of kind of having an orderly discussion, let's start with the idea of enforcement and how this draft is currently set up. And let's talk about whether or not you have problems with it, you agree with it, or you feel comfortable with it as a recommendation. So I would open up for comments on that point.
Hey Douglas, it's Frank at Wild Junes. Again, thanks so much for doing this. This has been great, and thanks for the draft so we could give this some thought. The only item I found that maybe is still a little unclear, and I truly don't know the city's expectation, is where we talk about the condo buildings again, as I brought up yesterday. So I just want to at least make it clear that short-term rental managers can't be expected to clean public areas of condo buildings or provide hand sanitizer in those condo building public areas. And that's noted each individually in the new guidelines or regulations. So I'm not sure if you're speaking to the condominium building managers at that point, or if you're speaking to the short-term rental like Wild Dune, well, not like Wild Dune, more like Island Realty, Sandy's Group, or Michael's Beachside Vacations. They shouldn't be dealing with the public areas of individual condominium buildings. Thanks, Douglas.
So, Frank, in response to that, so looking at page 2, B, cleaning procedures. And the most recent draft that we've just distributed says short-term rentals, hotels, condos, and accommodations shall. And then it has this list of now would be 5 things. And I would say the way that it's written, that somebody, let's just say a condo building, that
Douglas?
yeah, go ahead.
So I think it's pretty clear that second sentence there, or is that the third sentence? Under B1, it says hotels, condos, and accommodations businesses shall disinfect these surfaces within common areas at regular intervals throughout the day. That seems to indicate that it is the condo HOA's responsibility to maintain the common areas, because the short-term rental section is specifically called out above that, where it says such services within the short-term rental unit shall be disinfected between every guest.
So Frank, is your point that that's problematic? That let's just take, for instance, a common elevator of a condo building.
Right.
Are you saying it's unreasonable to expect that elevator to be cleaned at a regular interval, or what's your feeling there?
Sure, Douglas. It's true. It's truly the question is who cleans it. So, for example, a Shipwatch building in Wild Dunes, Beachside Vacations, Island Realty, Wyndham Vacations can't be expected to clean the common areas of that building simply because they don't own it. And I agree with what Ron said. It appears that the building manager would be responsible for it, but equally throughout the document, it refers to accommodation businesses. And frankly, I don't know the definition of that.
So maybe that's a poor use of words, but the use of that term was that was intended to mean places like Island Realty's office, accommodation, a place where people are coming in, getting keys, going out, checking in, checking out. That was generically put in there to kind of be a place where guests would be routinely. So continue. I may have interrupted you. So
no, you might have fixed it with that. Again, now I've lost the spot where it talks about providing hand sanitizer in public areas of buildings. We just need to make sure.
And I'll also say, Frank, that in terms of who is responsible, I don't know that the document ever specifies, it just generically says things like short-term rentals shall keep a list of, and, the owner could do that, the manager could do that. I don't think it's
okay, good. That solves my concern then.
As long as somebody is doing it, and I think it would be up to.
Hey, Douglas.
Yeah.
Interrupt, but I think both Scott and Sandy have something to say, and I saw Scott first.
Go ahead, Scott.
Sure. Do I need to unmute myself?
I can hear.
We're good.
You can hear me. Okay.
Yep.
Well, so this is what I touched on the other day. I mean, obviously Sandy and Beachside, those entities don't own the common areas of the condominium. The HOA does own them and does maintain those common areas. And we're asking them to adapt to this unique problem and provide some criteria with which they're going to make those areas safe. And, we got this email from Shipwatch that said, we don't want to have any responsibility in that. I think that's a complete cop out. And, why they couldn't assume it's, if they had an open and obvious hazard, like a sinkhole on the property, they'd be responsible for that. We're trying to address a hazard that's unknown, and we don't really know if we can ever see it. And we put in these guidelines, and here it's like they want to uh, absolve themselves of the liability for maintaining them under these circumstances. And that's exactly the opposite of what we're trying to do here. And certainly Sandy and the rental companies don't own them. Their people clean the units and maintain and work for the managers, but the people and entities that are responsible for these common areas it can be only one entity. That's the HA and the boards that they have there to do with it. It doesn't seem like much to ask them to provide these things at these problematic locations if they want to be in business. That's all I have to say.
Sandy?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. I think we're dealing with two different subjects here. The one you focused in on about the what is it? B6 is one subject. And then on the third page, J, I think is where Frank was coming from. And I want to go back to B6 if I may. But hand sanitizer shall be provided on each floor of short-term rentals and in all public areas of condos, hotels, including entrance, exits, and outside lobby elevators. I don't know that that's practical. My experience, and Frank, you correct me if wrong, but the hand sanitizers walk. I don't know how it happens. I don't know how we can be held accountable for, it was there an hour ago. I put another one out. It was there, and now, an hour later, and then it's here, it's gone, it's here, it's gone. I'm not sure in a condominium public area. I get the gist of what this is asking. And for those engaged with condominium management, I don't think that's a real, I don't think that's something we can do as an HOA manager or the HOA, much to the Shipwatch's commentary. I don't think he was denying liability. That's not the right word. I don't think he was denying the onus on his shoulders to do some things to protect the guests and the owners. But things like this, where it gets right down to the hand sanitizer must, it doesn't, it just, or it should be provided. I guess maybe that's the out. If I take it out, the word should, then okay, I can't do it. It keeps walking away. So I get.
Yeah. So there were.
Question.
Sandy, you're right. The hand sanitizer is a should, and I don't know where, if we've got a consensus here. But the thought was that in these condo buildings, you have a lobby or you have a common area that somebody, and I don't know that we've spelled out who it would be. Maybe the HOA would ask that their property manager do it. I don't know, but we would leave that to them to work out who was going to do it. But at the end of the day, the recommendation would be that they should have hand sanitizer in those common areas. So I don't know. That's
Puts a whole different light on it.
Was I understanding you correctly that you agree that it is appropriate to be in there, that those common areas should have these measures? You're on mute.
Yes, I don't have a problem as long as it's a should and not a shall. And there will be those that will abide by it, and there will be owners and guests that will recognize the risk for maybe hand sanitizer is not present in the common areas at a condominium complex. I think the hotels, it's not as much of a problem as there are people moving about and they would see a hand sanitizer walk away. But in a condominium complex where the traffic is not the same, you know, outside a lobby, elevator, I don't know. I don't think you can police that. I don't think it's realistic to ask anyone to have to police the location of the hand sanitizer. So that's my only comment for Jay.
So I'd like to jump in on that one and then go back to the other point. The hand sanitizer shall be provided exceeds any requirement under the CDC guidelines. The guidelines talk about sanitizing on a frequent interval, which I think we already incorporate above. So I would agree that probably is an onerous requirement. That said, it is a best practice to take reasonable steps to provide hand sanitizer. So I think it's a question of watering it down from a should to whether you want it in there as a recommendation. But to Sandy's point, that's a really, really difficult point to enforce that you have it there. That means someone's got to be on site, you know, checking it regularly. And hand sanitizer right now is extremely valuable. In a hotel lobby, I'm sure, you know, Wild Dunes is going to provide it, but they have staff there making sure it's not walking off. So if it's on an outdoor elevator, you know, at Shipwatch, there's nothing to prevent that from disappearing. So I agree on that point. And just to go back up to the top, because that was, you took our changes that we recommended, which was to eliminate 6 under B, which talked about hand sanitizer on each floor, I think it was, and or whatever that was, and it went to the standard in 1, which is again compliant with CDC guidelines, which is just to disinfect frequently throughout the day. So I think on that we've already got that, but the key one is J, which is should the standard should be provided, or is it, you know, we're expecting good practice, but you can't enforce if it's not there.
So should is already in there. So it's not I would say that makes it by default a best practice. You should have it.
Not with your enforcement provision.
Well, so the majority of these standards are shalls, but that one is clearly a should. So there is no enforcement. You can't enforce on a should.
Okay, if that's the understanding, we're fine.
Just out of curiosity, would we expect that condo common areas will have hand sanitizer, or do we kind of expect that? Sandy, I don't know who on the call.
I've seen notices of several HOAs who have already sent out their guidelines that they will be providing signage and hand sanitizer at their public elevators.
Okay. So it sounds like it's something that's being planned on doing. We have it in there, should. I mean, if we wanted to even water it down more than from should, we could even say should be provided at public areas where reasonable or where possible or when possible. I mean, we could water it down additionally, or we could.
Douglas, I think Liz wants to say something.
Okay.
Or sorry, Beth.
Beth, you're muted. Oh, there you go.
Hello. So we have in our very small complex, we don't have an office. We don't have on-site staff per se. We do have a laundry room that is considered common use by all the guests. We do already provide a tub of disinfectant wipes. I think if those were to be used, you know, it would be up to any one of us owners or perhaps myself as a property manager. If we could find wipes, we would certainly put them in there. So as much as possible, as is, you know, as is feasible, we should, as much as possible, provide these things to guests. I believe that that is what we should do. And as long as I have it, I'm happy to provide it.
All right, how about J, we add to the end of that sentence, when feasible? Does that ease everybody's? All right, I think we have consensus there. So we'll modify J to include the term when feasible.
Ray, I think, is going to be next.
Does it make any sense on J to have some sort of a statement that says that there's some language having to do with the personal responsibility of the guest in the absence of a hand sanitizer to provide their own materials? Just because you're kind of saying it's entirely the responsibility. Like in B1, you're already going through on certain intervals cleaning throughout the day. And then there's a concern that this hand sanitizer would walk. So we're only going to say where possible, but also have a statement to say that people also have some personal responsibility associated with this.
Well, and I think, you know, maybe that's a good point of adding to the notification, but in my mind anyway, the effort to put the onus on guests would be informing them with the signs that we talk about up front, that, you know, that they should act in accordance with state requirements, wear face masks when they should be, maintain social distancing, avoid entering if they have a fever. So I think that's implied in there, but it may be something we want to specifically put on the signage, that at the end of the day, they're responsible for their health.
So Beth had a comment after that.
I just was going to say that up in this this second section in this whole list, that, you know, in the absence of provided hand sanitizer or, you know, hygiene products, you know, they should be prepared to have their own. And when it's possible, we'll provide it. If we don't have it, they should prepare to have their own. Most people are doing these things already. So I don't think we're telling people anything they're not already planning for. But if we're going to say, we might not have it, so therefore you should plan to, if we're going to say on here, we're going to tell, you know, suggest that they have 6 feet, that they squeeze into a cloth or tissue, we should say in the absence of provided measures, they should prepare to have their own.
Is that so? I think, Beth, you would be advocating for amending the notification section 2A, and I think it would be subsections 1 and 2. 1 deals with short-term rental signs, 2 deals with hotel signs, to add in there a caveat that proper hand sanitation, including the use of personal sanitizer.
Sure.
Consensus on that? Everybody thumbs up? Put that on the sign? All right, so that's another, so we'll modify the signage for both subsection 2A1 and 2A2 to include personal hand sanitation.
Douglas, I think Sandy has something to say.
Okay, go ahead, Sandy.
A question for clarification. I got a email, as I assume everyone else did, from the good doctor from MUSC. And I assume from his commentary that he is going to review what we're doing and additionally make recommendations for changes at some point to be determined based on his schedule. Is that what I understood him to write to us?
That's Ed O'Brien last night.
Yes?
I didn't get that.
So I did receive that email. It should have gone out to everybody here. I can forward it to anybody who didn't get it. But it says that his MUSC public health team is slated to work on this Thursday and Friday, and they could have their recs together by the weekend. Well, we are going to present this to council tomorrow at a special city council meeting. So it doesn't sound like they're going to have time to review this. And that makes perfect sense to me, honestly, because what they're doing right now is statewide testing. So we're definitely on the list, but we're not really at the top of it. Go ahead, Stephen.
I think it's important at this point to say that we've all already incorporated CDC guidelines, who are the ultimate authority on this from a medical perspective. And you guys did a good job of incorporating the American Hotel and Lodging Association guidelines into this. Again, that was formed with reference to the CDC guidelines. So, I think from that perspective, we've got a lot of good advice and it's already incorporated.
All right. John, I believe you have something to say. You're unmuted if you want to go ahead.
Yes, I have a similar concern. I don't know if Sandy got to actually express it, but if we're turning this over to the council and then they're going to take it back to the doctor and then kind of come up with their own ideas, I think it'd be important for us to be in that conversation. We represent properties on Isle of Palms, but also on Kiowa. And on Kiowa, they've taken a whole different approach. The council is really involved, the property managers. And what they're allowing us to do is actually work with MUSC. And we're in the conversation with them. So instead of just turning over our recommendations to them and then letting MUSC kind of look it over, and then they just go into executive session with a decision, on Kiowa, we're going to be on that call tomorrow with MUSC. I think that's important. I really do, to hear what is coming from the doctors, directly from the doctors, and have input and insight from our side of the story to actually help the dialogue.
So the current plan, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt.
Sure.
If you want to go ahead.
No, we're good.
Okay, so I just wanted to clarify a couple of things. Our current plan is to send this to Dr. O'Brien immediately following this meeting to see if he can get a chance to review it before it goes to council. Council is not going to make any decisions in executive session. That's not a thing that they can do legally. I just wanted to get it out there that we are going to have this reviewed as best we can by medical professionals, but currently it's a where we are in their priority list kind of thing as to whether or not it gets done.
Just so we were supposed to have a conversation with Kiowa today and meet with the town council, but they postponed it until tomorrow so that the task force, so to speak, could have the same information that the council would give, and we could go back and forth on how it would work and roll out. That's how they're doing it on Kiowa. I think it's a very good plan. I've been impressed with it.
That makes sense, and it's a really good point, and that's why we have Brian Bosick on the line. Brian, are you available?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, I am here.
Okay. So in your opinion, the decisions that, or not decisions, we're not making decisions, but the guidelines that we're working on, are those sort of in line with what the CDC is saying and the guidelines that epidemiologists would recommend for short-term rentals and hotels?
So I've been looking at those, looking at the draft and the proposals and the changes to the draft. I'm mostly looking for things that would kind of stand out. But really, I guess I am best my role best is as a point of contact between questions from task force and my superiors at DHEC and providing a point of communication. So I have been passing those, the drafts along to my superiors for comments and questions. And right now I haven't heard anything to bring back to the task force on the things, the drafts that have been passed forward.
I would also add that the council has had Dr. O'Brien at almost every provide a medical briefing at almost every stop that they've enacted or rescinded an emergency order. So I would kind of expect the same to happen with this. So I think that they would see it potentially as their role to hear what the rental management community, short-term rental community thinks is reasonable. And I think they will put that through the lens of the doctors at MUSC. And then ultimately it's their decision. So I think they probably see that as a role that they would be doing. I think that's my personal opinion on that. I also know that they feel a sense of urgency of getting things moved along, and from just judging the timeline that they gave us in their emergency ordinance on Saturday, there clearly isn't much time to kind of for this task force to really wait on other agencies. So I can only guess that they're planning on them making the modifications that they see necessary based on medical advice if they get it.
Go ahead, Sandy.
So I think in the background, correct me if I'm wrong, folks, there is a certain amount of anxiety amongst many of us that this thing gets delayed and delayed. So I think where we're coming from, and to John's point, it would be really nice for all of us to be involved with a medical professional reviewing this, and as questions were to come up or comments about why did you do this, why did you do that, we had an opportunity to defend many of the discussions that we've had here based on our experience, their experience, and recommendations from other professionals throughout the country. This is not something that the vacation rental managers dreamed up. This is based in science and in medical fact. So taking that forward concern, I think, if I'm hearing John and others correctly, is that this is a perhaps utilized to delay an opening. And I think that we're at a point where it's time to open. And so I'm hoping that with my comments, we'll kind of segue into the next part of this, and that really is how much of a metered opening have we addressed with what we've done here, and we really haven't. We have, in broad terms, and with the numbers that I'd like to propose I have on my books, I say, if we open next week, what I'm seeing in my reservation activity is very dim and dismal. And will it increase? I believe it will, moving forward in a very incremental fashion. For instance, my May 13th to 17th time period right now, compared to my 2019 same time period, I only have 30% of the arrivals I had last year at this time period. My May 18th to the 24th time period, I'm somewhere slightly higher than 20% of the same time period. If you want to do the math, I manage approximately 300 properties. My May 25th to the 31st time period, I'm 31% of my 2019 high. and my June 1 to the 7th, I'm at less than 45% for that time period. I believe that is an incremental opening, a very soft landing for moving forward with vacation rentals as soon as possible. The other reason I'm anxious to bring this up and have some discussion on it is we need time to plan. I've got employees and personnel that have got to make plans for daycare. I don't know about other people out there, but there are people that want to come back to work, but they have other considerations on how to get back to work. Daycare just being a minor focus for a lot of our employees. There's other things that, and we've addressed it in this document. The supply chain. I don't know about you all. I'm having issues getting hand sanitizers, Clorox wipes. We're having to use our own, homemade programs. And they meet CDC guidelines and all of that. But we've got things on order that it may not be here till May 12th and May 15th. And so we need time to plan. If I were to open today, I couldn't do it. I think most of the operations are there. I don't have the employees. We've not been given time to plan. So I'm hoping that City Council will meet tomorrow and give us an open date so we can plan and get our incremental opening fleshed out, get our systems in place so that we can do the guidance here, get our signs printed. I mean, this is, I can grab a Sharpie, I guess, and some poster board from Walmart, although I'm not going to Walmart, and make signs, but we need time. And I don't want it to be 2 weeks from now. I got ancillary businesses, babysitters, chefs, beach chairs, bicycle rental people. They're all hurting, but they also need a little bit of time to get going. So I'm imploring City Council to consider this guidelines and give us an open date as soon as reasonably possible.
I hear you, Sandy. I do want to give Cliff a chance to speak because he's had his hand up for about 20 seconds here.
It's just really, Sandy, just to address kind of what you're saying. I agree wholeheartedly that if this thing lands without any kind of addressing of a phased approach, it's going to be DOA with City Council. We have to, that is definitely their desire, is to do a phased type approach. My concern is, or just for clarification, in your experience, I guess no one has experience in anything like this, but are you not anticipating once this is lifted that there would be a surge in bookings? You're saying right now you're at 30%. I also, the first thing that came to my mind when you mentioned all that is, should there be not necessarily a moratorium, but a restriction on the rate at which we accept new bookings? We honor all current bookings and maybe do something along that line for 30 days or so.
Hey everyone, it's Frank at Wild Dunes. Just a couple thoughts. Number one, we manage 500 accommodations, and Sandy's absolutely right. There's going to be a natural ramp up to this. Our forecasted, not actual, but forecasted occupancy for June right now is 20%. Now, granted, there's going to be some days where the occupancy is higher than that, some days lower to come out to a monthly average of 20. But the progression is going to happen naturally. The other thing we've seen is the demand is fairly sporadic. In other words, there's not a lot of pent up demand right now, because keep in mind, there's lots of folks that even though we are going to open, will not travel. They won't get a plane for sure in a lot of cases. But even if they're driving from our main drive markets, they have to stop at gas stations to get here. They got to get food on the way and so on. And then they have to go through our entire process to stay with us. Then they got to figure out where they're going to eat dinner or they're going to buy groceries. You get the picture. there's a lot of interaction. So I too agree it's probably going to happen slowly. And maybe the key thing is that City Council will understand that the ramp up will happen naturally. One last thing, our forecasted, again, not real, forecasted, so we have high hopes, is that by July we'll hit 40%. Now that's more than half less than we typically have had in a month like July. And then I think we all know everything drops beyond that.
All right, I think Beth was next, and then Stephen will go to you after that.
So I was going to say a similar thing about the ramp up. I think we have restrictions in place. A lot of nobody knows our guests better than we do. People that are emailing us are saying, can I sit on the beach yet? So we still have, we still have restrictions on the island. Dining is not opening. I mean, it's open, but it's not, full steam ahead with dining, and it's not accessible to everyone if you're not a good planner. I think, our neighbors in Charleston, they're still relatively closed up. So I just think, generally speaking, we have some current restrictions in place now. Well, that will go on for a little while. Maybe we want to think about, I understand council's position of worrying about the people that live on the island. Maybe there are some creative ways to open some of those restrictions while also providing an option for hours on the beach that would just be for exercise and people keep moving. Or then I just think that there have to be some creative ways of opening these things that in a way that it's going to be those restrictions that are lifted. The other thing I just want to bring up that really concerns me is that so much emphasis is put on short-term rentals and our guests. Everybody coming to the area. What if they're coming from New York? What if they bring something with them? And the fact is, we're going to have a spike in cases when the world starts moving, regardless of short-term rentals. My fear is that let's put so much emphasis on the short-term rentals that when we open it up and we see a spike, then by gosh, we have to reinstate the restrictions. And I don't feel it is the hospitality piece that's the key. It's going to be, we're going to follow the rules and we're going to clean our places and we're going to help our guests, to have access to what they need to keep themselves safe. But I also feel like they're not the answer to keeping this from coming to the island and keeping this from our hotels and that sort of thing. So I have a greater concern that so much emphasis is being placed on the short-term rental market.
Okay. So next, Stephen, I believe you raised your hand, and then Michael, and then Raymond.
So I concur with Frank. You look at the projected occupancy rates. We talked about this last time, that they're not anywhere near what they were last year. But the cancellations still continue to come. People are still canceling at the last minute that they have, and not necessarily just because the beach isn't open or they don't think that the Isle of Palms is going to be open. They are making personal decisions, very much focused on their health and their safety. And I don't see that that's necessarily going to change anytime soon until the entire, country feels better about the risk of resurgence or infection. So, we said it last time, I don't want that to get lost in this mix. There is a natural break on how quickly this will ramp up. As Beth says, beach, moving on the beach, pools, community pools aren't open. Restaurants, limited capacity outside. Guests are asking us about all of these, and that factors into their decision. But what I think, I hear from a lot of self-managed properties, homeowners doing it themselves. And they need clarity. They need a date. And whilst I understand, bigger organizations may or may not be ready to open, they got one property. They're cleaned. They're ready to go. They can have this signage out there. They're sitting with an empty calendar right now, and that is a huge financial burden for them. I've been operating outside of Isle of Palms already. Organizationally, we're ready to go. But I think we need a date, an early date, a clear date. If operators aren't ready to open, they can block their calendar. I think it stretches the ramp up period. I think the further out you put an opening date, the more likely you're going to compress demand to that date and have a bigger influx on that date. So there's just some natural, sensible breaks here. If we went to council and said, after this meeting tomorrow, open it up if you're ready. If you're not ready, you don't have the signage and you have it by Monday, open it up. If it takes you till next Friday to have the signage or whatever, you open up at that point. But I think there are people not on this call, and I get messages from, I'm getting text messages from them right now. We've got to remember principles, self-governance for everybody, guests and us and employees, and individuals who are losing money every day. That's going to have an impact on them financially and ultimately on their health as well. They don't get the seat at the table that they need. I think we have to consider them as well.
Okay. Michael?
Yes. Thank you, Ronald. Beth and Stephen, nailed this point, but, just to say one more time, our numbers are similar to Sandy as far as our expectation for guests coming in May. But that is based on the fact that they can go and swim in a pool and they can build a sandcastle on the beach. If we don't have those amenities available, those numbers will go down. People will not come here if they can't go to a pool or sunbathe on the beach. Any idea, Douglas, when those beach restrictions are going to be lifted? Has there been any indication that a family can build a sandcastle anytime soon?
I have no clue on that, Michael.
So, as we talk about reopening, the greatest challenge is, why are people going to come to the Isle of Palms if they can't do the things that they come to the Isle of Palms to do? This is all for nothing if we don't have a reason to come to the beach. That's going to be our biggest obstacle.
All right. Ray? You're still muted. Okay.
I will say that I think we already have choke things in place to stop people from coming. So any kind of a controlled, phased in approach to reservations, I don't think it will be even necessary, because of the no sunbathing and no pools, and all of that is already going to hinder people from wanting to come. I agree with everybody else.
All right. Dudley?
I agree with Stephen and everyone's point here. I think we should possibly consider, in our communication with the council, indicating to them that as the major rental companies, Sandy's group, Michael's group, Wild Dunes, we put in there that here is what is forecast and here's what is on the books, and it is this percentage of rentals. So it will address the council's fear about everybody coming at once and not get us into more legislation that can do any more harm economically to us. I just think it might be a good way to help mitigate that issue that a couple of the council people have had.
So I would just say that, Dudley, that the cover letter already says that market demands will have the effect of limiting occupancy.
Okay.
I think if your point is that we should maybe add an actual percentage or a guess, we could certainly do that if that's the will of the group. I don't know if that would be realistic to do, to take either Sandy or Frank's data and state it in a cover letter. Probably would be a complete shot at the dark, which I'd be hesitant to do. But we have put that in the cover letter that we do believe, and that's the reason specifically why we haven't included occupancy limits, time limits, fallow days, or those things.
All right, Cliff? Cliff, you're still muted. Hang on.
I got it. Douglas, to that point, and just generally along this line here, in your cover letter, you start that paragraph with the word unfortunately. Would you elaborate on why you did that and what brought you to feel that you needed to do that? Like, what are your sense about what we're recommending is?
He says
Where is the word unfortunate in the cover letter? Where?
At the, excuse me, ultimately, sorry, that was my bad.
All right, that's all right.
I'm sorry.
That's why we have these meetings. Scott,
Sure. Can y'all hear me?
I can hear you.
I was just going to say, I think that we should put the indication of what Sandy's and the other folks' numbers are compared to last year, and acknowledge in this cover letter that as long as the restrictions on the use of the beach and gathering are still there, they're going to continue to dampen the market. We need them to acknowledge that those restrictions are essentially hindering the opening of short-term rentals in this letter. And that if they're lifted, things will probably change and improve for these businesses. But if not, I just can't see people spending the money, like I mentioned the other day, on an expensive vacation to come to the beach when they can't do what they want to on it. And I think that needs to be highlighted to these council members. I think most of them realize and understand the economic situation that we're in and the need to improve it however we can. And so I think that'd be helpful in the cover letter.
We have, if we could, I think at least 3 or 4 of you have mentioned, I guess, the fact that the beach restrictions are ultimately a lever that council controls that's also impacting this occupancy. Is there consensus that we include a sentence in the cover letter spelling that out, that that's an additional lever that really they have control over and it's limiting occupancy? We have consensus there? Or are those, all right, I'm seeing a mixture.
Sorry, I wanted to talk. I think there's a danger then that we start focusing on 1 or 2 items. I think what we're saying is it's a totality. That market demand is suppressed, and I don't think we can express that adequately in this. I think what you got there is saying we are suggesting that market demand is going to be limited, and that any such ramp up period would therefore naturally have breaks in it. But I think when we start calling out individual items, then you either go all in, you start listing all the major things, and I think that's too much for this letter. I think we don't want to sort of give council an overly detailed impression of what guests may or may not do, because ultimately guests are going to decide whether that's okay or not. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Go ahead, Scott.
I was just going to mention that, one of the things that I'm hearing a lot of people's mention is, you can go to a restaurant right now, and the council meeting they had the other night, they spent an inordinate amount of time trying to accommodate these restaurants, giving them outdoor dining. And they're not recognizing the fact that the same family of 6 that can sit in the restaurant can't sit on the beach. And that's just incongruous with what we're trying to do here. Um, so, and quite frankly, if I was a family and I was thinking of a beach vacation, I wouldn't be coming to the Isle of Palms if I could go to another beach where that wasn't the case.
Go ahead, Stephen.
So I just want to clarify the thought. So if you pull out the beach idea, the concern is that then council think that that is the trigger for when people will or will not come back to the beach. It's one of many triggers. And I think you end up then with a situation where council may believe that they can limit demand by not making that change, when the reality is you may be able to make the change on the beach, but demand is still suppressed because of all the other factors that exist out there.
All right, John.
I agree with Steve about pulling out each and every one of our issues with what needs to be released. That being said, after listening to all the council meetings from start to finish, I think that this particular letter does lack one of the biggest things, and that is opening where they didn't want to open to begin with. Okay. And then once they did open, they were tossing around a 3-day gap put in place. Again, I've worked with Kiowa Island on this. We've had great meetings with them. And what they are proposing is to not legislate anything, so to speak, but work with the companies. And one of the ideas that if it becomes something where the MUSC doctors come in and they have a definitive answer that a gap is needed, that they were only looking at 24 hours. Then they went and they acknowledged the absolute nightmare it would be to go through our summer and cancel reservations and make those adjustments. So what they're looking at with MUSC is if a gap window is absolutely necessary, which I think is extremely debatable, that it only be input on 24 hours and also for new reservations. And I'm a little bit worried that this report goes back to the council and they have been so strict about not even opening despite what the governor has said. And now they have tossed around 3 days and we don't have any kind of step-in situation where, while it's not ideal, I am really worried that we're going back with basically, hey, we're going to provide some hand sanitizer. And I think that's why I would like to be on the calls with MUSC, because it is concerning to me that Kiowa Island is working with MUSC and Isle of Palms is working with MUSC, but we're getting two totally different, I guess, solutions being presented. I've heard 3 days tossed around a lot by the council, and 1 day even being mandatory. I just don't see how it could come up where two different islands so close together working with the same entities have totally different solutions.
So, and I'm not sure, John, if you were you on the call yesterday?
I was not, but I watched the entire thing.
So I would say that the idea of fallow days between stays was pretty soundly rejected by this group yesterday based on a number of things. The lack of kind of evidence as to what it achieves. The point has been made time and time again that if you have a problem, it can be mitigated in a matter of about 15 or 20 minutes with EPA approved disinfecting, and that a fallow day, there wasn't really a compelling reason to include that and the number of problems that it creates. So I feel like the group was pretty much in a line with not going with fallow days. I think you and I think Cliff has also made the point that what the task force is recommending is it's not, I think it'll be perceived as not having really strong measures in place at the time of opening. But I think the rationale for the task force doing that is these other factors that we've talked about: governor's orders, zoning occupancy limits, and just market demands. So I kind of share the concern that by making an aggressive ask that we not have fallow days, limiting occupancy, length of stay like Folly Beach is doing, that probably is going to make it more challenging for council to sign off on them as they're written. But I think, as I understand the will of this group, that's the recommendation that they've wanted to make. So I think,
I think that that's a very good point. And I'm not advocating for fallow days at all. What I'm advocating is for the opportunity to sit with Dr. O'Brien, who has seemed to really drive the council in many different ways, and advocate for the group and the other perspectives that go that way. That's what they're doing on Kiowa, and I think it's going to be beneficial in the end. If we come up with just, hey, no fallow days, here's what we're doing, and they're in their mind thinking 3 days, and they've been listening to Dr. O'Brien, I just don't see it transitioning very well. But
I would like to go ahead and point out that Dr. O'Brien was invited to both of these meetings. He was just not able to make it since it was kind of a short notice thing that council put together to have us do this. And as part of that, he does have the documentation that was sent out at the very beginning of this to all members, and then also the reviewed or results that came out of the first meeting that we have here in front of us today. Scott or Sandy, I couldn't tell who raised it.
Sandy, I'll defer to Sandy first.
I want to point out let me point something out. My numbers are based on the beach is open and the pools are open. So my 5-day period from May 13th to the 17th, the 28% of my business represents, during a 5-day period, 43 arrivals from May 13th to the 17th. I'm going to drill down right to what that number is. If the beach isn't open, the pools aren't open, I doubt I don't think I'll get 10 of those 43 coming. The May 18th to the 24th, that week period, I told you I was at somewhere near 20% of my 2019 numbers. That's 75 arrivals during a 7-day period, 10 a day on average, folks. And I think others are seeing that. That is based on the beach is open and the pools are open. If those things aren't open and some of the restaurants have some functionality, which they do, thank goodness, those numbers are gonna cascade down. They're not gonna stay the same. So I'm imploring the council to please take that into consideration, as this is a soft opening based on an open beach and some other amenities being available. If they are not open, these current numbers, of course, fall off the cliff. And now to many operators, it becomes, is it worth opening? At what level do we continue to take a loss? I do not want this to be a financial consideration. And I believe that the good doctor has not come out adamantly opposed to anything that we've suggested. We're all intelligent people and we've looked at the science. All of us are brutally aware of the conditions, as are our consumers, the guests, the prospective guests, in making a determined decision to either take a vacation or not. And at some point, I think we've got to walk away and let the marketplace take shape for what it is. Heaven forbid we push this can down the road another week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, then it does start to kind of become an issue for how do we manage. We need, I mentioned it before, we need time to plan. We can't just tomorrow be told we're open and start work. We don't have it. Most of us do not have it in place to do. I'm done.
Right. and then Beth.
Sure. I just wanted to say, we had a good example of irrational fear from both our citizens and our council with the removal of the checkpoint. They said if we removed it, we were going to be flooded and it was going to be awful. It didn't happen. The beaches were desolate yesterday. I've been out there today. I don't see them. And certainly what everybody has mentioned here, and that, you know, some people just aren't going to travel. I think that we need to point out to council that this irrational fear of overcrowding and people coming here not knowing that there's a virus, not knowing that these precautions just isn't going to manifest itself. And the whole purpose of what we're doing here is opening up. I mean, you're either opening up or you're not. And these restrictions, I think they're going to be challenged legally by other groups, if not removed by the council in the near future. And we need to acknowledge that, you know, the sky is not going to fall just because we open up short-term rentals, as much as we have people that might think that. But the checkpoint certainly served as an example of that. It was causing us more problems than good, in my opinion.
Okay, Beth? Oh, hang on, you're still muted.
Okay.
There you go.
So of the crowd on this task force, do we have single home owners or single property? Who else has a single property that they're? So
It looks like
we,
Cliff and Ray
we were
both.
to, I'm sorry?
I said it looks like Cliff and Ray both raised their hands, and
Okay.
Dudley.
So if rentals were open today, would you be ready?
Yes.
Because for the most part, I could be ready by the end of the day. And if we were open today, would you have guests coming in tomorrow or the weekend? So I think, you know, I could be ready within a few hours. So you could tell me today, open them up and I would be ready. The problem is it takes time for me to answer all the emails to say, hey, we're open. And all the people that are saying, are you open yet? It takes time for those people to make their reservations. So, you know, and then they're going to make their plan to come down for the weekend or, you know, so it's not going to be immediate. It's just, even if we were ready today,
I'm gonna come down.
I hope that town council will come back and say, open effective immediately. If it was open effective immediately, we still wouldn't have, you know, we still have to, those people have to make their reservations. It's a bad situation, but you know, it's going to take time. It could take the rest of the year or into next spring before we begin to feel like there's any sort of normalcy to this whole thing. I do have a question about DHEC though. So our pools are regulated by the state and not the local entities. Do we have any thoughts on when DHEC might open pools?
I'm going to defer to Brian on that one as
Okay.
our representative.
We went from open pools to limited capacity to closed pools. So I would expect that at some point they would open the pools with limited capacity.
That's a good question. I actually am very interested in the answer to that question as well myself. And I don't have the answer personally, but I am going to ask that question up the chain and see if I can get any kind of guidance and return it to the group. Even if it's not during the meeting, then I will try to email Ron, who's been sending out the messages.
Thank you very much.
If I could, so we're an hour and 20 minutes in, and I do want to, there are a handful of other topics. I do think that, so a couple of things. I've heard a little bit, I feel like John and Cliff may have felt like the approach is weak in terms of being really a soft opening. I think that I'm hearing the rest of the group say that the approach is correct and allowing market demand to dictate that it is a soft opening, whether we like it or not. And I guess I want to set that to rest with, and you know, there's not really a vote here, but to just get consensus, could you, if you feel like the position is too weak that this task force currently has on paper, which is to basically implement these standards for some duration that we'll talk about, but not limit the length of stay, require fallow days, or further reduce occupancy. If you feel like that is too weak of a position, I'd like to get an indication of that. I feel like Cliff and John may have indicated that they feel like that's too weak. Or John, you want to, maybe you two would like to say something, and if others feel like it's too weak, if you would speak up, we wouldn't need to.
Sure. I'm not saying that it's too weak at all. I'm just worried that the way that this has been formatted, where we make this one-page proposal with a couple of highlights of things, and then it goes to their council, and then they turn around and they get to meet with MUSC kind of without us meeting with MUSC. I think that it could be presented as in a better light. I agree with everyone else that the rollout will naturally be tiered and naturally come along. But I just am worried that they're going to get this and then go back to their 3-day because we're not going to be involved in the process. That's what my fear is, not that we're too weak.
My point was, I as well, I don't think it is too weak. I believe what we do need to do is to include in the cover letter or some form of communication that we're making these decisions and we feel that they comport with the CDC and the AHA, and that these things, that we feel that this is covered, that this comports with all of those recommendations, and that based on market forecasting, we anticipate there will be no need for these more restrictive measures to be in place. I think that needs to be communicated in some way, manner, or form. And that's all.
Okay. I think I saw Stephen and then potentially Dudley.
Yeah, I agree with Cliff, and I share the concern that John has. And I think it comes down to the letter of recommendation. I have a question for the city staff, though. Staff's going to present the task force recommendations and this letter. Do you get any ability to articulate how this arrived?
Yes, yeah, there certainly will be discussion about it, and I can report that I think, to John's point, Dr. O'Brien wasn't there. I'm guessing he may be there tomorrow at 2. I don't know that for certain, but he has been at a lot of the council meetings here recently, so he may very well be there, but I will certainly state that he was not there for your meetings. But
do you feel comfortable also articulating, to Sandy's point, we paid, considerable attention to the science. We've looked at, the legal aspects, the enforceability, and maybe we put this in the letter. To Cliff's point, maybe we need to say we considered and have developed these guidelines in accordance with the CDC guidelines and the Hotel Lodging Association guidelines. We considered the legal aspects and the enforceability aspects of it. And given the unprecedented situation and the fact that we're not seeing a rush to the beaches, in Hilton Head or Myrtle Beach, or even here on Isle of Palms, if you've lifted the barrier, we believe there are natural breaks. That said, we recommend that short-term rentals can commence from May 8th, so long as the host, operator, or agency has complied with the procedures. And then we've got clarity, and then we have a clear position without leaving it open and vague. Well, that was the attempt of the letter. I mean, the letter goes into the fact that the task force focused on sanitation, hygiene, training, dissemination of information instead of rules about limiting occupancy or fallow days or anything else.
But, you know, if there are suggestions as to how to improve the letter, I would certainly be willing to take those. And Sandy, I don't know if you, so this idea of, and we've got to it and then we got away from it a bit, but this idea of supporting the notion that market demand is currently depressed. Would you feel comfortable just sending a quick paragraph summarizing the percentages that you've recited to us, to this group, as just to have information to have during the discussion if detail is requested on that point? And you could send it to me, or you could send it to the council and copy all of us, or however you wanted to do that. Could you do that?
I'm gonna put it in the newspaper.
Okay. And maybe so we wouldn't have it in the letter, but it would
Very
be,
confident and comfortable in my statistics and do not mind publish them for general consumption. It's real.
okay.
Not making it up, guys.
They're also broadly in line with the market. We have access to some market-wide data through one of our data agencies, and they're broadly in line with the market. That is not a unique position.
Okay. So Stephen, are you saying that you would also be willing to, so you have access to similar data that would also make that point? Could you send that along as well?
Yes.
Okay. So let's touch on the duration, and we'll wrap back up and just kind of generally see if we have consensus. But personally, I was thinking that the duration would be effective immediately, so the ban would be lifted immediately, and that these provisions would be in place for 30 days, and that's kind of taken out of a hat. I don't know if we want to make a different trigger. I mean, some things may be triggered on lifting of orders, or it could be some other date. Is there any sense in the group as to, first of all, if immediate is too soon?
If I can jump in here for a second, Michael, I believe you had a opinion on the length there. You're muted. Hang on. Sorry. You might have to unmute yourself. It doesn't seem that I can do it from this end. There we go.
Am I good?
Yep.
Douglas, should not this, we should tie this to the governor's state of emergency or his public health emergency, since that's the catalyst to what we're discussing. As long as those two items are in place, you know, I would think that would be the reason why we're doing the things we're doing, is to apply that to those emergency ordinances by the governor.
Ron, do the governor's orders have a end date in them currently, or are they just in perpetuity until he rescinds them?
So I might be wrong, but as I understand it, the declaration of an emergency lasts for 15 days. And at the end of that 15 days, he either has to extend it or let it lapse. And the last time it expired was towards the middle of April, I believe, or the end of April, and he re-extended it. So I think we're probably looking around May 15th. I'd need to do some research to give you a hard date, though.
Okay, so that's one. We could tie it to the end of the governor's state of emergency, which may be all of 5 days away.
Along that thing, I don't think anybody thinks that, this thing's not going to disappear tomorrow. It's going to be here for a while. I don't see any problem with extending it basically through, Labor Day type deal, just so, I don't think there's going to be any case in which we're not going to have to responsibly do these things at least that long.
All right, John, and then Scott. Hang on, John, you're muted. Let's see, can you try unmuting on your end?
So before we go too much farther on the duration, Desiree just rang in and said that as I guess part of the code, emergency ordinances are in effect for 61 days.
So back to the emergency ordinance, and I'm not a politician or anything like that. I would worry about the governor extending it for financial purposes so that the state could still get aid, while there's not necessarily the driving forces of what's causing us to limit later. So I like the idea of a set date, maybe with an opportunity to revise that. However, I don't like committing to any date without knowing what I'm committing to. So if they were to say, 3-day gap for just no other reason, but that might be a 15-day deal, a 30-day deal. But if it's no sitting on the beach, I don't want to commit and say that I recommend that we put a 30-day or 60-day policy on that. I have a hard time really nailing down a date or a reasoning if I don't know what I'm actually committing to.
Douglas, correct me if I'm wrong, but this would just be, this date that we're talking about would only be for the recommendations that are in the existing document that we sent out today, correct?
That's correct. And John, to your point, the date would be part and parcel of the recommendations. So I don't think anybody would take, if council, and they, it's ultimately their decision, if they were to modify your recommendations, I don't think they would believe that they can take the date, the duration out of your recommendation and then apply other standards to that. So, it would be all one kind of presented as one package deal. But at the end of the day, if they modify it, I mean, that's their will to do that.
I just want to say, I think 30 days is not enough. I think if any of us think that we're not going to be doing this cleaning protocol for at least the 60 days, it's just not going to happen. I mean, look at what has happened in every country around the world that preceded the United States. They're still doing strict cleaning procedures. So I'd be fine saying, it's valid for 60 days and maybe renewed thereafter. But I would also request that, if they're going to be a consideration of renewal, that they reconvene the task force and let us come together and discuss, our experience, because 60 days from now, we're going to know an awful lot more.
Scott and then Beth.
Well, that's what I was going to say. We've just been referring to, number one, the market controlling the situation. And so maybe we throw a bone to council and say that this is what we see now, but depending upon what the market actually yields, we might have some ideas about the length or extending or even changing some of these suggestions. And I think that kind of gives them some satisfaction that we're not just throwing off the doors and saying this is how it's going to be set in stone for a short period, for this period of time. That if something should change, if we have a greater problem that arises or a greater crowd that arises or a lesser crowd that arises, maybe some of this stuff could be changed.
Okay, Beth?
So we can make these recommendations based on what we know of medical science, and if these recommendations are accepted as is, honestly, I totally agree with anyone who has stated we're going to be doing this for a while. So I would not be opposed if they accept it as is for a longer stretch of time until, like Scott says, unless we learn something different and can reconvene.
So I don't know, I think this came across, but I believe we're talking about 61 days as being just part of what an emergency ordinance would do. It's what I'm understanding Desiree to say. That sounds like 61 days may kind of
Sure.
fit nicely with what Stephen was saying, and potentially Beth and Cliff as well.
If accepted as written and as suggested at this point, if they add add or change
All
something,
bets are off.
I mean, if they add, occupancy or length of stay limits, then that 61 days is not going to work.
Right.
All right.
I'm going to take that as consensus on 61 days, even though there may not have truly been consensus there.
Is there consensus?
Would anyone else like to speak on the date length? Getting a lot of thumbs up. Yeah. Sandy, was that a thumbs up or did you want to say something?
Talk. I don't, to everybody's point, I don't foresee it being a 30-day event moving forward. Meaning it, 60 days is probably reasonable. I just hate to open the door too wide to, how do I say this politically correct? A government that I believe is overreached and will take this as an opportunity to go further. And that's out, cat's out of the bag, folks. Any council people listening, that's just me and Sandy's opinion. I would like to go out 30 days. The council can always continue it as it reads at the bottom. It's subject to their continuing it. I mean, they can do what they want. We're just making suggestions. So anyway, my experience, my comment, my opinion.
Go ahead, Stephen.
I think we beef up the letter language we talked about, like adding in, it's been based on the CDC guidelines, the hotel lodging industry guidelines, and science into the letter. I think the 60 days speaks more to the fact, as Cliff raised the concern, or John raised the concern that, they asked us to go consider some of these other restrictions, and we're coming back and saying they're not practical, they're not enforceable, and I think we need to say that in the letter. But I think the fact that we're willing to say we'll operate these cleaning standards for 60 days is showing a bit more of an intent. Otherwise, I just feel like we're coming up with some, I hate to use watered down, because I agree with Sandy in that we're doing what's recommended. We're doing more than a lot of communities are going to do. And I think we'd say that these are fair, and we're prepared to do it. And that's why I think going to 60 days is probably okay, because we have to at some point say, we're given the intent that we're serious behind these recommendations, which I think we are. But the letter needs to reflect that we have, this isn't just a bunch of people sitting waiting to get back into the short-term rental business. This is a bunch of professionals. We've got national standards, and these comply with our national standards. And I know Hyatt has national standards, and they comply with their national standards. And I think that needs to be conveyed to the council to give them some understanding of the weight of thought that has gone into this. And so hopefully they would not just, and I know councils all over the world can do whatever they want, but that if we convey properly the consideration that we put into this over these 2 meetings, which I think has been considerable, then I think these are a good set of recommendations, and we should stand behind them.
All right. Douglas, I think we've run a little bit long here, but any
So
additional?
I was gonna wrap up with what I have, what I think the group has kind of generally agreed to, and let's just talk. Hopefully that will kind of bring it all together, and we can see if I've missed the boat or if we're still lacking. So the points that I have, we're going to add to the letter description. So already we have a sentence in there saying that basically you're not recommending limiting the occupancy. Therefore, the attached recommendations don't include such provisions, but they focus on proper sanitation, hygiene, training, dissemination of information. And to Stephen's point, we're going to add some detail there that's based on CDC guidelines, science, and the hotel industry guidelines. So we're going to add a little bit of detail to that sentence. We're going to add a basically a comment that we currently have these beach restrictions that are also limiting demand. And I think I'm just going to leave it. I'm not going to go into great detail there, but I'm going to put it out there that it's been dwelled on by this group that there are these beach restrictions that are having an impact. So I'm going to mention that. That's the extent of what I have on the cover letter. Now I have more comments on that I'll go into, but is that generally okay? Cliff's got a comment. Let's get comments on the cover letter first.
I think we need to add the appendix of that data that we're talking about from Sandy and Stephen.
I was going to, because that's only from 2 individuals, I had planned on that being an email to the group, and I would have it as backup data during the discussion, if that's okay with everybody, but not to put just 2 individuals' example in the document.
I actually have I think a 6-page report, and it's all market data. It's not my company's data, or it's market data.
Oh, okay.
I've already sent it to Desiree
Yes.
and the mayor. I'll forward it to you afterwards. You can decide if you want to. I can send it to I'll send it to the whole task force, but it basically is something before the task force was created that I created based on looking at market data of how difficult it would be to implement occupancy and length of stay changes. And you can forward that to the council if you want.
Yeah, I would like to do it that way where we have the information, but I would hate to get, deep down into percentage points and that level of detail and just to cover executive summary. If that's okay.
Scott?
With regard to the limitations of occupancy and fallow issue, can we put something in the letter that says that we don't have any scientific data or CDC instruction that those things would be effective, or is that problematic in any way?
So we say in the letter, it says the task force, blah, blah, blah. Additionally, the task force agreed that there would be challenges to enforcing or measuring the effectiveness of such limits is the generic language that we used in the cover letter.
Okay, I was just trying to see if it might be helpful if we could lean on the fact that there isn't any scientific data or medical guidance that those 2 issues would help us in any way, because I think that's the fear of the council is that, or the people that suggest them, that there is data. If maybe John can speak to that from his experience at Kiowa. Has there been anything to indicate that, or is that just something that people have latched onto and said, well, it'd be better if we had more time to clean it out or if we had less occupants?
Go ahead, John.
Our meeting is tomorrow. So Kiowa we've discussed internally with the town of Kiowa, and their stance is actually just don't over legislate. They know that the rental companies are going to do everything that they possibly can to keep the island and community safe. So their stance is we're all going to work together. We're going to meet with MUSC together tomorrow, but the initial reports are that so much can be done from a hygienic point and a cleaning standpoint that there is no real point to do a 24-hour or 3-day, certainly, lull period.
Okay.
But again, tomorrow our meeting will be with them, so we know that we'll be able to discuss and find something definitive.
All right, Douglas?
Oh, hold on. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the standards themselves. We agreed that in the notification section dealing with short-term rentals and hotels, that we were going to add an extra provision there that would basically add the provision that personal hand sanitizer is suggested or should, people should be held accountable for having their own personal hygiene materials as necessary. We were going to add in J, the section about hand sanitizer in condos, hotels. We were going to add just a provision at the end there that says when feasible. And then on 7 at the bottom of the page, the duration, we were going to have it effective, recommend that it become effective immediately and run for 61 days, which is the natural cycle of a emergency ordinance. And if it's agreeable, so it's 2:43 now. We're supposed to have kind of have this out the door to council tonight. So I would like to be able to make those edits, send them, forward them on to council. Sandy and Stephen, if you all would also provide the data that you have. Stephen's already done it. Provide that data, and I think we would wrap this up for the council. Any comments there? Cliff?
Doesn't sound like there's going to be any comments on that. There's just one other thing while we've got this form that I would like to throw out there. It would be nice if it would be possible at regular intervals if the city could put out some list in layman's terms of what the current restrictions are that we can provide to future guests and to have available in our rental units, just to make them aware of what they are so they don't want to foul them accidentally.
So Cliff, I had a hard time. So were you saying once council takes action, that basically the city reach out to the property managers with all of this information and what's expected of them?
No, separate totally from these recommendations.
Okay.
I'm talking about current restrictions that are in place for beaches, restaurants, those types of things in some type of layman's terms that we can provide so that when guests arrive or even before they arrive, we can forward to them what to expect in way of what the island's expectations are for them to do in policing themselves.
So if I can just jump in here for a minute, we do have a frequently asked questions article on the latest news section of our website at the very top there on the homepage. And that contains sort of a breakdown in layman's terms about like the keep it moving ordinance and some other things that are going on around here as far as parking and stuff like that goes.
Very good.
Any other comments? Andy?
Very quickly, Ronald, will at the point that city council adopts what we're suggesting, provided they adopt it, will this be put out to all owners of record with a rental license? Or is it only be on the website?
We will for sure share it on the website and on Facebook and Twitter and all that stuff like we normally do with any other public meeting. And then, you know, if you guys would like me to, I've got a list of short-term rental holders and I can reach out to those people as well.
I think email would be appropriate.
We will go ahead and send it to all emails then.
All right, are we ready to collectively give a thumbs up or a thumb sideways or a thumbs down on the recommendations? All right, John's not doing it.
I already did.
All right, very good. Well, we'll make these changes. And I don't know, would the group like to, why don't we do this? If the council tomorrow.
I do want to say, sorry, Douglas, we do have a list of everybody who has a short-term rental license, all their emails. I will send it out to that list.
Yeah. If the council tomorrow does anything other than accept the recommendations kind of as presented, would the group like to reconvene? And I don't know, it's going to be at 2 o'clock on a Friday, and it may very well go into, into for several hours. So I don't know that we'd have time to do it tomorrow evening, but would you all like to do a follow-up on the results? If it's anything other than accept them at face value? Okay.
Seeing a lot of yeses there.
So we'll, if everything goes well, they're accepted, we will just reach out to you and let you know that. We'll reach out either way, but we may expect a meeting if it's necessary based on the actions of council. Beth, you have a comment?
Can you also follow up if DHEC gets back to you about the pools?
Yes, I will. Sandy?
Just real quick, I assume that as soon as you get what you're drafting again, that it'll be released to the good doctor so that he'll have time to do whatever he believes needs to be adjusted also?
Yes, we will do that.
Okay, hopefully he can get to it before council meeting.
Yep.
Okay, so Douglas, any final comments?
No, that's it. Thank everybody so much. I know this was on very short order, and I really appreciate, and I think it's been extremely useful for the city. So thank everybody tremendously.
Thank you very much for your help, guys.
Thank you, guys.
Thank
Talk to you later.
Bye.